Hello everybody, welcome to judycentral.com online classes for law exams. So today I will be dealing with you the other important judgments of the year 2020 which have been delivered by Supreme Court. So earlier I have discussed with you the best judgments of the Supreme Court of the year 2020, and today I will be discussing with you the rest of the other Supreme Court judges judgments which have not been covered previously. So let us start. So the first case is Paramveer Singh Saini versus Baljit Singh, decided on 2nd of December 2020, in which the Supreme Court directed all states and UTs to install CCTV cameras in all police stations to help curb custodial violence. The three-judge bench of R.M. Nariman, K.M. Joseph and Aniruddha Bose justices has directed all the states and UTs to install CCTV cameras in all police stations and file compliance affidavits within 6 weeks. The court said that the directions are in furtherance of the fundamental rights of each citizen of India guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution of India, and hence the executive, administrative, police authorities are to implement this order both in letter and in spirit as soon as possible. Then in the case of Shafi Mohammed versus State of Himachal Pradesh 2018, the court had directed that a central oversight body be set up by the Ministry of Home Affairs to implement the plan of action with respect to the use of videography in the crime scene during the investigation. So this is what the Supreme Court has earlier suggested in Shafi Mohammed's case in 2018, but it has been seen that earlier 14 states and 2 UTs had filed compliance affidavits, but the court noticed that the majority of the compliance affidavits and action taken reports failed to disclose the exact position of CCTV cameras qua each police station. It has directed that the compliance affidavit is to be done by all the states and union territories, including those who have filed so-called compliance affidavits. So Supreme Court has directed them again to file the compliance affidavits as they fail to disclose the exact status of the installation of CCTV cameras in their respective police stations. Then the directions: all police stations should have CCTV system installed at all entry and exit points, main gate of the police station, all lockups, all corridors, lobby, the reception area, and also in front of the police station compound, outside, not inside washroom, toilets, duty officers' room, back part of the police station, etc. Then CCTV systems that have to be installed must be equipped with night vision and must necessarily consist of audio as well as video footage. So all these directions have been given to regulate the violence which has been committed in custody. Then it has also said duties of the state level oversight committee, and its primary duties are to purchase, distribution and installation of CCTVs and its equipment, then obtaining the budgetary allocation for the same, among others. Then it has also laid on duties relating to district level oversight committee, and its duties is to supervision, maintenance and upkeep of CCTVs and its equipments, and also to interact with the station house officer as to the functioning and maintenance of CCTVs and its equipment, and to review footage stored from CCTVs in the various police stations to check for any human rights violation that may have occurred but are not reported. So these are the duties casted upon the district level oversight committee to keep a check on the police station. Then directions were also issued to Union of India. So the Supreme Court is directed to install CCTV cameras and recording equipment in the offices of, so these are the offices: CBI, NIA, ED Enforcement Directorate, then Narcotics Control Bureau, Department of Revenue Intelligence, then Serious Fraud Investigation Office, any other agency which carries out interrogations and has the power to arrest. So the Supreme Court has observed that as most of these agencies shall carry out interrogation in their office, then CCTV shall be compulsorily installed in all offices where such interrogation and holding of accused take place in the same manner as in a police station. Because in all the offices, the interrogation of an accused generally takes place. So these are reasons why the Supreme Court has directed to install CCTV cameras in all these agencies apart from police stations in all the UTs and states. Then what is to be done if force used at police stations? So let us see. Whenever there is information of force being used at police stations resulting in serious injury or custodial death, it is necessary that persons be free to complain or for a redressal of the same. And let us see how. Such complaints may not only to be made to the State Human Rights Commission, which is then to utilize its power more particularly under Section 17 and 18 of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993 for redressal of such complaints, but also to human rights courts, which must then be set up in each district of every state, union territory under Section 30 of the aforesaid Act. So this is very important, as we do not have till now anything called human rights court situated in every district. So in this case, it is suggested by the Supreme Court to consider setting up of Human Rights Committee, which is already provided under Section 30 of the Protection of Human Rights Act. Then the Commission Court can then immediately summon CCTV camera footage in relation to the incident for its safekeeping, which may then be made available to an investigation agency in order to further process the complaint made to it. Then the next case is Asian Resurfacing of Road Agency Private Limited versus Central Bureau of Investigation. In this, the Supreme Court has held that civil or criminal pending cases cannot be stayed for more than 6 months. An extension can be granted only by speaking order. So let us see, in order to ensure that the civil or criminal proceedings do not remain pending for unduly period, at the trial stage, the 3-judge bench of A.K. Goyal, Naveen Sinha and R.F. Nariman justices directed that in all pending cases where stay against proceedings of a civil or criminal trial is operating, the same will come to an end on expiry of 6 months from today, unless an exceptional case by speaking orders of such stay is extended. So as per the Supreme Court, it wants to say that if any civil or criminal trial is actually stayed by the appellate court, so the stay will operate only for the next 6 months, and after 6 months the stay will come to an end only in cases of except in cases where the stay has been granted or the stay has been extended for another such period, and it has to be done only by a speaking order. So in its words, in all pending matters before the High Courts or other courts relating to PC Act or all other civil or criminal cases where stay of proceedings in a criminal trial is operating, stay will automatically lapse after 6 months from today unless extended by a speaking order on above parameters. Same courts may also be adopted by civil and criminal appellate revisional courts under the jurisdiction of the High Courts. The trial court may on expiry of above period resume the proceedings without waiting for any other intimation unless express order extending stay is produced. So like I said, like once the stay comes to an end, the power has been conferred to the trial court to start the proceedings, to resume the proceedings, unless the stay is again extended by any speaking order. So the court was actually, so this issue is involving an interpretation of Section 19 Clause 3 Subclause C of the Prevention of Corruption Act. And another question that the court had to decide was whether the inherent powers of the High Courts are available to stay proceedings under the Act under Section 482 of the Criminal Procedure Code. So Section 482 deals with inherent powers of the High Court, and the question was asked that whether the High Court has the power to stay proceedings under Section 482. So the Supreme Court answers in its words by saying the order framing charge is not purely an interlocutory order, not a final order. Jurisdiction of the High Court is not barred irrespective of the level of a petition, be it under Section 397 or 482. So it means that Supreme Court has, that means the jurisdiction of the High Court has the power to stay the framing of the charge or to stay the proceedings under Section 482. However, the said jurisdiction is to be exercised consistent with the legislative policy to ensure expeditious disposal of a trial without the same being in any manner hampered. So it has to be done, but taking into consideration the legislative policy to ensure expeditious disposal of a trial. Then the next case is Arjun Pandit Rao Khotkar versus Kailash Kushan Rao Gorantyal. So in this case, the SC clarified law on admissibility of electronic evidence without certificate under Section 65B of the Evidence Act. So this case is very important from the point of view of cyber law. So like generally we know that a certificate has to be produced while adducing any evidence which is of electronic in nature under Section 65B. And let us see in a reference dealing with the interpretation of section 65B of the Evidence Act that deals with admissibility of electronic records. The three-judge bench of R.F. Nariman, S. Ravindra Bhatt and V. Ramasubramanian justices has held that certificate required under section 65B clause 4 is a condition precedent to the admissibility of evidence by way of electronic record. That means it's a mandatory requirement to furnish the certificate before the evidence of electronic record gets admitted. As correctly held in the three-judge bench in Anwar PV versus P.K. Bashir, 2014 judgment. In 2014 judgments also in Anwar PV's case, it has been held by the Supreme Court that in case of electronic evidence, certificate under section 65B is mandatory. That's what it is upheld in this case. And it also clarified that the division bench Shafi Mohammed versus State of Himachal Pradesh has incorrectly clarified the section 65B clause 4. The court further clarified that the required certificate under section 65B clause 4 is unnecessary if the original document itself is produced. So the court has actually clarified the doubt that suppose in case if the original document is produced, then whether the certificate has to be produced or not under section 65, because then the Supreme Court said no, it is not necessary. If the original document is produced, then there is no requirement to furnish the certificate under section 65B. The court was hearing the reference from the July 26, 2019 order, where after quoting Anwar PV versus P.K. Bashir, a three-judge bench of decision of this court, it was found that a division bench judgment in Shafi Mohammed versus State of Himachal Pradesh made it reconsideration by a bench of a larger state. The division bench in the Shafi Mohammed judgment had clarified that the requirement of a certificate under section 65B clause 4 being procedural can be relaxed by the court whenever the interest of justice so it justifies, and one circumstances in which the interest of justice so justifies would be where the electronic evidence is produced by a party who is not in possession of such device, as a result of which such party who would not be in a position to secure the requisite certificate. So in this case, in Shafi Mohammed's case, it has been said by the Supreme Court earlier that suppose if the person is not in the possession of that electronic device, then he need not to produce the certificate. But in this case, it has been clarified, and the Supreme Court has also modified the judgment of Shafi Mohammed's case and said that no, even in those cases, if the electronic device is not in the possession of the petitioner, still he can furnish certificate under section 65B clause for requesting to produce the same. So we'll see. The three-judge bench in the present case holding the Shafi Mohammed judgments to be incorrect said the major premise of Shafi Mohammed that such certificate cannot be secured by persons who are not in possession of an electronic device is wholly incorrect. Like I said, an application can always be made to a judge for production of such a certificate from the requisite person under section 65B clause 4 in cases in which a person refuses to give it. So suppose if a person has the knowledge of that electronic device but he doesn't have the possession of it, and the electronic device is in the possession of somebody else but he is not ready to produce it, then the person who wants that electronic device to get admitted under section 65B, then he has to furnish an application under section 65B clause 4 requesting the court to order the other person to produce that electronic device. Clarification on Anwar PB's case. So according to the Supreme Court, if an electronic record as such is used as primary evidence under section 62 of the Evidence Act, the same is admissible in evidence without compliance with the conditions in section 65B of the Evidence Act. That's what is said in Anwar PB's case. But the Supreme Court in the present case has clarified the Anwar PB's case and said that the confusion over the above mentioned sentence in the Anwar PB case and held that the last sentence in Anwar PB case, which reads as if an electronic device as such is used as primary evidence under 62 of the Evidence Act, is to be read without the words under section 62 of the Evidence Act. That means it has actually given a broad meaning to the electronic evidence under section 65B. It said the clarification referred to above is that the required certificate under section 65B clause 4 is unnecessary if the original document itself is produced. This can be done by the owner of a laptop. So under these circumstances, the Supreme Court has clarified that the required certificate under section 65B clause 4 is unnecessary if the owner of a laptop computer or a computer tablet or even a mobile phone, by stepping into the witness box and proving that the concerned device on which the original information is first stored is owned and or operated by him. In cases where the computer happens to be a part of the computer system or computer network and it becomes impossible to physically bring such system to network to the code, then the only means of providing information contained in such electronic record can be in accordance with section 65B clause 1 together with the requisite certificate under section 65B clause 4. So this court has actually clarified that suppose if the person is actually producing the original document, like suppose if it is stored in his own computer or laptop or computer tablet or even a mobile phone, then in those cases it is not necessary to furnish a certificate under section 65B clause 4. But suppose if the device cannot be produced in the court, then in those cases only the certificate under section 65B clause 4 is required. Then the other direction, the bench issued directions to cellular companies and internet service providers to maintain CDRs and other relevant records for the concerned period, and that has to be done in tune with the section 39 of the Evidence Act in a segregated and secure manner if a particular CDR or other record is seized during the investigation in the said period. So the Supreme Court is actually directing the cellular companies on internet service providers to maintain the CDR, that means call data records, in a specific format, so that whenever they are summoned in any trial or in any other circumstances, then the direction shall be applied in criminal trials till appropriate directions are issued under relevant terms of the applicable licenses or under section 67C of the Information Technology Act, so such that these evidences can be produced whenever the court calls upon during the trial. The court directed that the appropriate rules and directions should be framed in exercise of the Information Technology Act by exercising powers such as in section 67C, and also framing suitable rules for the retention of data involved in trial of offences, their segregation, rules of chains of custody, stamping and record maintenance. So under section 67C, the court also directed the central government to frame rules and regulations as to the storage or segregation, record maintenance of this electronic data. Then the next one is Vidya Drolia versus Durga Trading Corporation, and in this case it has been held by the Supreme Court that landlord-tenant disputes such as under Transfer of Property Act are arbitrable. Supreme Court lays down tests for determining non-arbitrability of disputes. So let us see. The three-judge bench of N.V. Ramana, Sanjeev Khanna and Krishna Murari justices has overruled the ratio in Himangini Enterprises versus Kamaljeet Singh Ahluwalia, wherein it was held that landlord-tenant dispute governed by the provisions of the Transfer of Property Act are not arbitrable, as this would be contrary to public policy. So the observation of the Supreme Court in this case, or the decision of the Supreme Court in Himangini Enterprises, has been overruled by the Supreme Court in the case of Vidya Drolia versus Durga Trading Corporation, and said that landlord-tenant dispute can be arbitrable under Transfer of Property Act. Then this question is, are landlord-tenant dispute arbitrable? Answering, the Supreme Court said landlord-tenant disputes are arbitrable as the Transfer of Property Act doesn't forbid or foreclose arbitration. However, landlord-tenant disputes covered and governed by rent control legislation would not be arbitrable. So here the Supreme Court has carved out one exception, and it said that suppose if the landlord and tenant disputes are covered under the respective state rent control act, then such disputes are not arbitrable. But if it is not, then it is arbitrable under the Transfer of Property Act. Then Supreme Court has also formulated a fourfold test for determining the non-arbitrability of a dispute. So these are the tests: when cause of action and subject matter of the dispute relates to actions in them, that means against the whole world. that do not pertain to subordinate rights in personam that arise from the rights in rem. Then when cause of action or subject matter of the dispute affects third party rights, then in those cases also the landlord-tenant dispute is non-arbitrable. Then when cause of action or subject matter of the dispute relates to inalienable sovereign and public interest functions of the state and hence mutual adjudication would be unenforceable. Then when the subject matter of the dispute is expressly or by necessary implication non-arbitrable as per mandatory statutes. So these are the fourfold tests that has to be taken into account while deciding whether the case is eligible for arbitration or not. Then instances of non-arbitrable dispute. So these are the examples of non-arbitrable dispute. In these cases, no arbitration can take place. Then insolvency or intra-company disputes, then grant and issue of patents and registration of trademarks. Criminal cases, matrimonial disputes relating to the dissolution of marriage, restitution of conjugal rights, etc. Then probate, testamentary matter, etc. Allegation of fraud can be made a subject matter of arbitration when they relate to civil dispute. This is subject to the caveat that fraud which would vitiate or invalidate the arbitration clause is an aspect relating to non-arbitrability disputes which are to be adjudicated by the DRT under the DRTR. So these are the cases which are non-arbitrable. Then the next case is, the name of the case is Sri Ranga Katneshwarkar versus Kunal Kamra and Aditya Kashyap versus Rachit Taneja. In this, the Supreme Court issues contempt notices to comic Kunal Kamra and cartoonist Rachita Taneja. So let us see. The three-judge bench of Ashok Bhushan, R. Subhash Reddy and M.R. Shah justices has issued notice to cartoonist Rachita Taneja and comedian Kunal Kamra in two separate cases relating contemptuous social media posts. After obtaining Attorney General for India K.K. Venugopal's consent, a law student had filed a petition against Taneja for initiating proceedings for contempt for publishing contemptuous posts on her social media pages. Sanitary parlance which allegedly scandalize and undermine the authority of the Supreme Court. The petitioner has filed this contempt petition. So they have filed this complaint case against these two persons, and they have also obtained the permission of Attorney General for initiating contempt action against this person, because it is very much necessary that while before and contempt action is taken against a person, permission of Attorney General is mandatory. Similarly, an advocate and two law students sought for initiation of criminal contempt proceedings against the Kamra for publishing contemptuous tweets on his Twitter handle. So the complaint is against contemptuous post on social media pages and also in their Twitter handle. Then while giving consent in Kunal Kamra's case, the Attorney General had noted, I find that today people believe that they can boldly and brazenly condemn the Supreme Court of India, its judges, by exercising what they believe is their freedom of speech. But under the Constitution, the freedom of speech is subject to the law of contempt, and I believe that it is time that people understand that attacking the Supreme Court of India unjustifiedly and brazenly will attract punishment under the Contempt of Courts Act. That's what the Attorney General said before giving his permission or before giving his consent in this contempt case. Then the next one is this one is again of contempt case. So the case citation is in re Vijay Kurle, and this contempt has been taken by the Supreme Court suo motu. Scandalous allegations against the Supreme Court judges, SC finds all three advocates guilty of contempt. So let us see. After finding advocates Vijay Kurle, Nilesh Ojha and Rashid Khan Pathan guilty of levelling scandalous allegations against Justice R.F. Nariman and Justice Vinit Saran, the bench of Deepak Gupta and Aniruddha Bose justices has sentenced all three to undergo simple imprisonment for a period of 3 months each with a fine of Rs 2,000. It further said that in default of payment of fine, each of the defaulting contemners shall undergo further imprisonment for a period of 15 days. So let us see the background. The basis of the contempt proceedings was 2 letters running into more than 250 pages dated so and so received by Chief Justice of India Ranjan Gogoi and other judges of the court, admittedly signed by Vijay Kurle, state president of Maharashtra and Goa of the Indian Bar Association, and Rashid Khan Patan, national secretary of the Human Rights Security Council, respectively. In the letter, they were referring to the contempt proceedings against Advocate Matthews Nedumpara. The court has already discharged Matthews Nedumpara last year in September after he denied any role in sending those complaints. So, by this letter, these persons were actually raising their protest against the contempt proceedings which has been initiated against the Advocate Matthews Nedumpara. And he was, although this Matthew Nedumpara was discharged, but he was actually suspended for 1 year. It is pertinent to note that the bench of R.M. Nariman and V.D. Saran justices had barred Nedumpara from practicing as an advocate in the Supreme Court for 1 year after he had argued before the court during a proceeding. He said, judges of the court are wholly unfit to designate persons as senior advocates, as they only designate judges' relatives as senior advocates. This is a statement made by Nedumpara, and this is a reason why he was suspended for practice for 1 year, although he is discharged. Mr. Nedumpara was referring to the three-judge bench of Ranjan Gogoi, R.F. Nariman and Navin Sinha justices, laying down elaborate guidelines for the system of designation of senior advocates in the Supreme Court as well as the High Courts of India. Like all you know how the senior advocates are designated in the Supreme Court, and these advocates have actually made this scurrilous remark that only those persons become senior advocates as they only who are the judges, who are the relatives of a senior advocate. Then what was the letter all about? So let us see the letters which has been written by these three persons. Let us see what is actually the cause of action in the letter. That the bench of Justice R.F. Nariman and V.D. Saran could not have taken cognizance of the case because the case was not assigned to them by the Chief Justice, and that both the judges acted as judge in their own cause. That's what the letter said. Then that the bench has not suo motu taken notice of the contempt, and therefore the registry cannot treat it as a suo motu petition. So by this sentence, they are actually raising protest against the contempt proceedings of Mr. Nedumpara. That even in suo motu contempt proceedings, the consent of the Attorney General is necessary. That the proper procedure of framing a charge is not followed because the defects at the initial stage cannot be cured by later order developments. That the judges were bound to disclose the source of information. So this the letter has actually made all these remarks, and that and the reason the Supreme Court frowned upon the consents of upon the words of these letters and decided to sentence the three advocates to 3 months imprisonment with fine. Then the next case is Dr. A.K.B. Sadbhavana Mission School of Homeo Pharmacy versus Secretary Ministry of Ayush. And in this, the Supreme Court has held that Ayush doctor can prescribe homeopathic medicines but can't advertise them as a cure for COVID-19. That's what the Supreme Court said. The three-judge bench of Ashok Bhushan, R. Subhash Reddy and M.R. Shah justices has held that while the homeopathic practitioners can prescribe medicines for COVID-19, neither them nor any other medical practitioner can claim that they can cure COVID-19. That's what the Supreme Court said, that the homeopathic practitioner can prescribe medicines to cure COVID-19, but they cannot claim that their medicines can cure COVID-19. The court was hearing an appeal against the directions issued by the Kerala High Court to take action against homeopathic doctors to prescribe any drug as a cure for COVID-19 disease should be proceeded with under the provisions of the Disaster Management Act 2005. The court had held that homeopathic doctors can only prescribe medicines as immunity boosters. So in this case, the decision of the Kerala High Court was challenged, in which the court has suggested that those doctors who are actually advertising themselves that they can cure the COVID-19 disease by homeopathic medicines and they shall be prosecuted under Disaster Management Act 2005. So the Supreme Court said when statutory regulation itself prohibit advertisement, there is no occasion for homeopathic medical practitioners to advertise that they are competent to cure COVID-19 disease when the scientists of entire world are engaged in research to find out proper medicine vaccine for COVID-19. There is no occasion for making any observation as contained in paragraph 14 with regard to homeopathic medical practitioners. The homeopathy doesn't cure the disease, but it cures the patients. That what the Supreme Court says, that the homeopathy cannot cure a disease, but it actually cures the patients. And it also said that once the advertisement are prohibited, then there is no occasion for homeopathic medical practitioners to advertise that they are competent to cure COVID-19 disease, and also at the time as scientists of the entire world are in research to find out proper medicine or vaccine for COVID-19. It observed that the High Court was right in its observation that no medical practitioner can claim that it can cure COVID-19. That's what the High Court said, and it upheld the decision of the Kerala High Court. Supreme Court actually upheld the decision of the Kerala High Court and said that there is no such claim in other therapy including allopathy. The High Court is right in observing that no claim for cure can be made in homeopathy, because even allopathy also doesn't promise that it can cure COVID-19. So the same thing also applies to homeopathy also. The homeopathy is contemplated to be used in preventing and mitigating COVID-19 as is reflected by the advisory and guidelines issued by the Ministry of Ayush as noticed above. So the Supreme Court has said that although homeopathy is not capable of curing COVID-19, but the medicines are effective in preventing and mitigating the COVID-19 as it's reflected or as it is mentioned in the Ministry of Ayush guidelines. So this has been the end of the slide, and I hope you all have liked it. Do not forget to give a like, share and subscribe to the channel. Till we meet the next time, thank you and have a nice day.